It was 5 a.m. when the shouting started again. The kitchen smelled like old perfume and last night's fried onions. Mira stood in the doorway, 8 months along, one hand on the counter because the room tilted and her legs felt like jelly. Daniel stood in the living room with a face that had no patience left. His parents sat on the couch like judges waiting for a sentence. "Get up and make breakfast for my parents," he barked, loud enough to make the thin walls hum. Mira blinked, tired in a way that went past sleep. "Daniel, it's 5. I haven't slept. The baby's been kicking all night. Can't you?" Agnes laughed, sharp and small. "You deserve it," she said. "A woman who can't keep her husband happy shouldn't be lying around like a queen." Felice, Daniel's sister, smirked and added, maybe if she learned some respect, she wouldn't be told twice. Mira's stomach sank. She knew those looks and those tones. They used to be small arrows, now they were open fire. It had started slow, a comment about how she folded a shirt, a quiet critique about how she spoke. Small things that felt like nothing at first, until the house filled with them and left her hollow. She moved to the stove because she had to. Her body protested with every step. Eggs, toast, coffee. She set the plates down and felt the world tilt again. She sat on the edge of the couch to rest. Felice muttered, "Lazy." Something inside Mira went still, a cold clarity that felt like survival snapped into place. Years of being careful, of swallowing, of pretending everything was fine, boiled into a single decision. She would not let this keep happening to her or to the life growing inside her. Her phone was in her pocket. She had the number for her childhood friend, Mira, on speed dial. Her fingers hovered. Her thumb shook as she typed 3 letters, SOS. She pressed send. She didn't have a plan beyond that small word. Maybe Mira would call. Maybe nothing would happen. All Mira knew was the sound of Daniel's voice and the weight in her ribs. As she waited, her vision blurred, and the room folded inward. When she woke, she wasn't at home. A hospital room smelled like disinfectant and a different kind of quiet. A nurse explained she'd fainted from stress and dangerously high blood pressure. The baby had been checked. Tiny heart strong. Daniel came later, not running, not panicked, but angry, as if the problem was public attention, not what he had done. He asked how she could make such a scene. He cared more about gossip than about her pulse. A few hours after he left the waiting room to argue with hospital staff, Mira appeared with a lawyer. Mira listened to words she had never thought would be for her. Protection order, evidence, reporting abuse. That small SOS had reached someone. That small reach changed the shape of the day. Tell me in the comments, if this happened to someone you loved, what would you do? Subscribe to follow this story. He wasn't perfect at first. He was the kind of man who remembered how Mira took her coffee, who listened as if every story mattered. They met at a community outreach program where Mira volunteered helping victims. Daniel came as a sponsor for a housing project, polite and steady. He asked questions, showed up for meetings, offered to drive people home. Romance felt safe, small acts that meant a lot after a life of giving to others. When he proposed, he said things Mira had wanted to hear, that home should be a refuge, that she deserved kindness. Friends praised them. For months it felt like a quiet dream. Daniel fixed a leaky sink, warmed her hands on cold nights, called during lunch just to ask how her day was going. That kind of attention broke through old walls. She let herself hope. Then Daniel's father got sick. The parents moved into their house temporarily to help. At first it was practical. 2 weeks, meals shared. But the house shifted. Small corrections came wrapped like advice. Agnes would remark on how Mira folded towels, the speed she moved in the kitchen. Felice made jokes that landed like knives. Daniel smiled at his family and agreed with them in a way that felt small but sharp. Those first comments were tiny, almost polite, but they kept coming. Visits with friends required permission. Her bank card was inspected to keep things balanced. If she disagreed, Daniel accused her of being dramatic. He minimized her feelings until she doubted herself. Conversations that once ended in laughter now ended in silence. The man who once protected her began echoing his mother's tone. Mira blamed herself at first, thinking pregnancy stress or sleep. She tried to be better, to smooth things over. She kept a journal of the small humiliations that felt too petty to report. Each note made the same line: I am shrinking. The last entry before the baby showed up read like a warning she couldn't yet make into action. Neighbors later said they heard quiet arguments at night. Mira stopped calling her mother and lied about plans to avoid questions. The house felt crowded. She counted days until the baby, hoping it would change things, even as fear settled her chest. He wasn't perfect at first. He was the kind of man who remembered small things. When Daniel asked Mira to marry him, he spoke about safety, quiet nights, and building a home together. After years spent helping others, Mira wanted a place where she could breathe. For a while, his attention felt like a balm. He fixed the leaky sink, learned how she liked her coffee, and showed up when she needed someone to listen. Those little acts became the proof she clung to when the world felt loud. Their wedding was simple and felt honest. Friends cheered, her mother cried happy tears. And for a few months, the picture on their mantel, them laughing under string lights, looked like the future she'd imagined. Daniel was gentle in public and private. He called at lunch just to ask how her day went. He held her hand through hard counsel sessions at the outreach center. Trust grew slowly, like a plant coaxed from a bare pot. Then Daniel's father fell ill. What began as a short stay to help care for him stretched longer. Temporary boxes opened and never closed. At first, it was practical. More hands in the kitchen, someone to run errands. But the tone of the house changed. Agnes watched how Mira folded towels and corrected her like an instructor. Felice made jokes about how Mira spoke too much. Daniel started agreeing with them in ways that felt small and sharp. Mira raised concerns once, soft, wary. Daniel said it was stress or the pregnancy, words meant to soothe, but that also shut things down. The explanations became rules. Visits with friends required notice. Purchases needed approval. A simple disagreement turned into evidence that she'd overreacted. The man who had promised refuge began echoing the family's judgment. Mira kept a private notebook of small humiliations, quick lines to remind herself she wasn't imagining it. Each page read like a shrinking map, where she had given up parts of herself to keep the peace. Nights that used to be full of laughter became quiet. The image on the mantel stayed, but the life around it started to feel crowded and controlled. Mira told herself she could manage until the baby came. The more she told herself that, the more she felt trapped between hope and fear. The house filled with other people and with other rules. At first they helped. A dish dropped here, a prescription picked up there. But help arrived wrapped in judgment. Agnes treated their kitchen like her domain, commenting on how Mira stirred soup or arranged plates, as if she were training a new worker, rather than welcoming a daughter-in-law. Felice's laughter followed every misstep, and Daniel's silence after those laughs stung harder than any insult. Mira learned to measure her words. A question about a bill or an offhand comment about a friend became a test. If she slipped, the family would frame it as proof she was careless or ungrateful. Daniel's responses shifted from comforting to corrective. "You're tired, Mira. Don't make things into more than they are." His voice folded her concerns into mood or stress, and slowly those labels replaced real conversations. Isolation arrived quietly. Invitations from her mother were declined after thin excuses. Coffee dates with friends dwindled into awkward texts she learned to ignore. Money, once a shared thing, became monitored. Mira would reach for her card and find a casual question about the purchase, the tone implying oversight rather than curiosity. Every check and every comment narrowed her space. Small acts that felt harmless to the family landed as stones in Mira's chest. A plate left on the table earned a sharp look. A laugh at the wrong time earned a cutting remark. The rhythm of the house taught her to expect humiliation before comfort. She tried to complain to Daniel in careful terms, but he folded her words into explanations. The stress of caregiving, the pressure of money, the worry about the baby. Those reasons might have been true in part, but they were also shields that hid intention. The household's corrections multiplied until Mira saw them as the rule of the house, rather than choices any adult could change. Nights became exercises in endurance. Days were a list of small losses. She kept counting down to the baby, hoping birth would reset everything, while the oppression in the rooms around her quietly tightened its hold. The night before that morning felt like a long, slow test Mira did not know how to pass. She had been cooking since noon, hands tired but careful, trying to make dinner for people who treated her like a nuisance. Guests filled the living room with sharp laughter and clinking plates. Mira carried a heavy tray through the crowd and spilled a little soup. Someone snorted. Daniel watched and did not move. Agnes made a show of being amused. "Clumsy," she said where everyone could hear. Felice turned the moment into a joke, and the room laughed as if that made it fine. The sound of the laughter dug in. Mira smiled because she had learned to hold herself small to keep peace. When Daniel's father joined in with a cutting line, the smile slipped, and something cold spread in Mira's chest. She stepped away to the small bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. Her belly moved with the baby's kicks, as if the child was trying to tell her something she could not yet hear. She texted Amira a short, raw message. "I don't know if I can finish this pregnancy here. I'm scared." Amira's voice was steady on the phone when she arrived later, with a small, fierce calm. Before Mira could delete the message in shame, Amira took a screenshot. "Keep it," she said. "If you ever need proof, we'll have it." The screenshot felt like a future lifeline, a small, quiet rebellion against a house full of people who assumed they could say anything. Dinner ended with plates left like evidence on the counter. Daniel complained about the meal being cold. His parents found fault in tiny things, then left as if they'd performed charity. Mira lay awake that night, counting ceiling tiles, thinking about the man who kissed her publicly, but watched silently when others tore at her. She tried to make plans to leave, but practicalities rose like walls. The baby, money, the house. Each reason kept her in place. Before sleep took her, she typed something she'd never meant anyone to read. "If I don't make it through this, tell my baby I tried." Her thumb shook as she sent it. Then she lay in the dark, hoping no one would ever need to use those words. Early the next morning, the shouting started again. Daniel's voice carried through the thin walls. His parents backed him with sharp remarks. Mira tried to move slower, to breathe steady, but the room spun and her vision tunneled. She typed 3 letters with shaking hands, SOS. She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. The world folded beneath her feet. She collapsed in the kitchen and someone called for help. Neighbors later said they heard the commotion. A 911 call followed. Mira woke in a hospital bed amid sterile light and the steady beep of a monitor. A nurse told her she'd had a stress-induced faint and dangerously high blood pressure. The baby's heartbeat sounded strong on the machine like a small, brave drum. Daniel arrived hours later with anger, not concern. He was worried about talk and appearances, not about her pulse. He asked how she could make such a scene. His words were cold, as if headlines mattered more than a woman's body. Mira answered quietly, with a clarity that surprised her. "You need to leave. This has to stop." Mira appeared at the hospital with a lawyer in tow, a presence that felt like sunlight in the room. The lawyer talked in steady phrases Mira barely understood at first. Protection order, evidence, filing a report. Pieces that had felt scattered started to fit into a shape that might protect her and her child. Midway through that conversation, Mira looked directly into the camera in her head, the one that would someday tell this story to strangers, and thought, if you're still watching this, do two things. Subscribe so you don't miss what happened next, and tell me in the comments if you think I should have left sooner. That small ask felt like reclaiming control. As the legal steps began, Mira felt a fragile hope. Help had arrived because she had finally asked for it, but she also knew the fight was just starting. The house was not just a building anymore. It was evidence, memory, and a battlefield where truth would need witnesses. When Mira walked into the hospital room, she did not come alone. She brought a quiet determination and a lawyer who spoke in clear, steady sentences. The lawyer didn't offer platitudes. She listed steps: document everything, gather witnesses, secure a protection order, and put the facts on record. For the first time since the collapse, Mira felt like someone outside the house understood what she was facing. Mira sat beside Mira like a shield. She handed Mira a paper cup of water and a phone with contacts already entered: a counselor, a domestic violence advocate, a legal aid number. The lawyer explained rights in plain language. You have the right to safety. We can make them leave the home. We can record statements. We can show the court what happened. Each sentence was a small, steady pulse that pulled Mira out of fog. Filing the report felt surreal. At the police station, a woman officer took Mira's statement with care, typing slowly as Mira spoke. She wanted details, dates, who was present, exact words when she could remember them. Mira's voice trembled at first, but then steadied. Naming the moments out loud made them real in a way the house had not allowed. Mira's screenshot helped. The message Mira had sent in a moment of terror became a time-stamped piece of evidence. The lawyer suggested more: install a recorder in the living room, document medical visits, collect witnesses from neighbors who had heard fights. These moves felt like strategy instead of chaos. Back at the hospital, Mira signed the forms for a protection order. The lawyer warned the process would be slow and sometimes cruel, but that action now would build safety later. A strange mix of fear and relief washed over Mira. She was afraid of what would come, but relieved that she no longer carried the fight alone. Outside the station, Mira squeezed Mira's hand and said, "You did the right thing." Mira wanted to believe her. For the first time in months, the future felt like a thing she could at least touch. She felt a little steadier. Mira was practical. When she said she would help, she did not mean gentle words only. During one visit before the collapse, she had placed a small audio recorder in the living room lamp while she and Mira pretended to chat about old times. It felt sneaky then, but Mira knew the house had ears and that proof would be needed. The recorder captured weeks of ordinary cruelty, offhand insults, quiet commands, the laughter that always followed when Mira stumbled. It recorded Daniel telling Mira she should be grateful to live under their roof, and his mother mocking her for being from a different background. It recorded Felice's snide remarks and the way the family turned missteps into entertainment. When the lawyer played the files in a private review room, Mira's stomach dropped. Hearing those voices outside the walls of her house made the abuse tangible. The recordings included the morning Mira collapsed, Daniel's sharp orders, Agnes's cruel laughter, Felice's mocking tone, and Mira's weak pleas. It was raw and embarrassing and true. At first, the defense tried to claim the recordings were edited or taken out of context. They hired an expert to question authenticity, but the timestamps and Amira's clear notes about when she visited created a chain that supported the audio. The lawyer also had the hospital records and witnesses who could confirm Mira's fainting and high blood pressure. When the judge listened to the clip during a preliminary hearing, there was a long silence that felt heavier than applause would have been. The judge asked quiet questions, more like someone trying to make sense of facts than someone hunting for drama. For a moment, the courtroom felt like an instrument that could finally play the notes of Mira's life without distortion. The recording did not erase the past, but it put weight behind Mira's words. It turned private pain into evidence. The simple act of hitting play changed how people saw what had happened in that house. After the hearing, some neighbors gave statements, and an anonymous reporter called about a possible article. Friends offered character notes. Each new support felt like a small victory, and proof she had not invented the harm. Mira listened to the recording again with her lawyer. Hearing her own voice made her ache, but it also made her feel seen. The evidence would not erase what happened, but it would force the family to answer. She felt oddly brave and quietly, deeply tired. Daniel did not go quietly. When the family realized the court was taking Mira seriously, he shifted tactics. At first, it was social pressure, calls to mutual friends questioning Mira's story, a message here or there painting her as unstable. When that didn't work, he moved to the thing he thought he knew best: paperwork and money. One morning, Mira learned someone had filed documents that listed the house as jointly owned in a way that would let Daniel sell without her consent. The claim used her name and a signature she did not recognize. It was the kind of move that traps people in fear. Sell the home, take the money, leave the other to fight for crumbs. Mira's lawyer smelled trouble and ordered an immediate forensic review. The forensics team compared signatures, dates, and filing stamps. The differences were small but clear: ink that didn't match, dates that had been altered, a signature that was a shaky imitation. What Daniel had hoped would be an easy erasure became a trail of mistakes he had left in haste. When the lawyer filed the counterclaim, the defense scrambled. Daniel's tone in public meetings shifted from irritation to panic. His parents arranged meetings with family friends, trying to show a united front. Felice, who had once mocked Mira openly, went quiet in the courthouse halls. The family's confident posture cracked. But the courtroom is a place of records, and records don't care about bluster. The judge ordered an independent handwriting analysis. The analyst's report was concise and damning. The documents were altered. Signatures were forged. Fraud charges moved from possibility to probability. There was a moment Mira never forgot. Sitting in the gallery, watching Daniel's face when the analyst explained the findings in plain language. He looked smaller, like someone realizing the ground under him was no longer steady. The family's whispered assurances turned brittle. People who had once nodded politely now averted their eyes. This chapter of the fight was not about dramatic shouting. It was legal work, patient and relentless. It felt merciless at times, but it also felt necessary. Every corrected date, every verified signature, narrowed the space where Daniel could hide. Evidence stacked like quiet bricks until the structure of his defense began to crumble. Mira watched the legal work like someone watching a slow engine turning over. Each report and filing felt like fuel being added, and she could finally imagine a day without fear, and steady. After the legal shocks, Mira did something unexpected. She built. With the protection order in place and court proceedings active, she accepted a temporary position at a local domestic violence organization. It was ironic. She had come to those programs as a volunteer years before. Now she returned in a new role, this time on the other side of the desk. The work helped more than she expected. Talking with other survivors, sorting resources, and learning legal navigation gave Mira a sense of purpose that eased some of the raw edges. She kept medical appointments and counseling sessions, stacking small routines that felt safe. Friends who had been distant came forward to support her publicly, and neighbors who had once refused to look now offered kind words and witness statements. There were moments of doubt. Some nights she replayed the recordings and felt a wash of shame. Other days she woke with gratitude for the little victories, a cleared legal filing, a neighbor's statement added to the file, a new client at the counseling center who said Mira's words had helped them choose safety. Rebuilding was not dramatic. It was practical. Paperwork, calls, coffee with a counselor, a slow rebuilding of trust. The house still held memories, but Mira began to fill new rooms, with clients who needed her, with quiet mornings that were hers alone, and with plans for a future that included her daughter. She learned that healing could be steady and plain and strong all at once. The past would linger, but daily work made the future possible. She made practical plans, a savings jar for moving, a checklist for childcare, and a promise to teach her child clear boundaries and how to ask for help when needed. The preliminary hearing hummed with low voices and the rustle of papers. Mira sat with her lawyer and felt a stillness that wasn't peace but attention, everyone in the room waiting to see if law would translate into safety. The judge moved through motions with a steady hand, reading evidence and listening to witnesses who had once frowned at their front window. The judge issued immediate protections. Daniel was ordered to leave the house and stay away from Mira and the baby. His parents received restraining orders after threatening comments made outside the courthouse. For a woman who had learned to measure every word, the orders felt like a blunt, necessary shield. Outside the courtroom, Daniel argued with his attorney, the arrogance gone from his voice. A few supporters tried to staff up a show of normalcy, but their faces were careful now. Neighbors approached Mira quietly, offering short statements and apologies for not speaking sooner. Some seemed embarrassed. Others looked relieved the truth had a place to be seen. Mira watched the orders become papers she could hold and carry. The paper itself was thin, but it felt official, like language that could press at a door and keep it closed. She still feared furtive threats, but seeing Daniel removed from the home gave her a margin of safety. That night, after court, Mira walked the first short block without checking over her shoulder. The motion felt small and important. She was not yet free of the past, but she had room to breathe and plan. For the first time in months, she slept more than a few hours and woke with a small, steady hope that the next legal steps would finish what the orders had started. Today. The trial moved slowly, as trials do, but when the evidence was laid out in plain terms, the mood in the courtroom shifted. Financial records, the audio clips, medical reports, and the handwriting analysis painted a picture the defense could not erase. Daniel's confident posture gave way to a hollowed look. The judge read the findings and the charges: fraud, perjury, and filing false documents. The verdict was not immediate, but the weight of proof was clear. When the conviction came, it landed like a final stamp on a long fight. Daniel was found guilty of fraud and perjury. The consequences were legal and social: fines, criminal records, and a public fall in reputation. People who once nodded at family gatherings began to distance themselves. Daniel's job change and the loss of community standing made the cost of his actions visible. Mira's labor began months after the conviction, a small, hard labor that brought a single, bright, raw moment of joy. She named her daughter Hope. Holding hope for the first time was a quiet, fierce redemption. The office that had helped Mira connect with legal aid now helped with parenting classes and a small fund for supplies. Mira felt the circle of care tighten around her and the baby. A reporter who had followed the case ran a careful piece that respected privacy while telling the basics. The story spread online and struck a chord. Messages arrived from strangers who had lived through similar abuse, from women who said Mira's choices gave them courage. The attention brought offers, speaking gigs, counseling referrals, and donations for the small center Mira dreamed of starting. Still, Mira wrestled with mixed emotions. The conviction did not undo the nights she had spent afraid. Public attention felt useful but strange. She did not want pity, she wanted change. But each message and each donation felt like a small doorway toward the future she wanted for her child. The legal team kept working after the verdict, filing motions to secure restitution and to block any attempt by Daniel to reclaim property or income tied to the fraud. His lawyers talked about appeals, but the social damage made recovery slow. Mira spent afternoons planning the small center she wanted to open, writing services, a budget, and contacts who offered help. She thought about messages from strangers who said they finally spoke up because of her. Those words sustained her on hard nights. Still, she guarded hope and taught her to ask for help. Mira knew the future would demand patience, and she felt less alone. She allowed herself to dream of a quiet, safer life. There was one moment Mira did not plan for. Felice standing in a crowded conference hall months later, eyes red, voice small as she approached Mira between sessions. Felice's presence was the kind that used to make Mira tense, the smirk, the easy put-downs. Now the smirk was gone. "I'm sorry," Felice said, a confession that sounded more like survival than apology. "They did the same to me after you left. I didn't know how to stop it." The room felt thin around them. Mira had rehearsed responses in the quiet of late nights, anger, revenge, an icy refusal. Instead, she found her face softening in a way that surprised her. The woman who had once mocked her now spoke with the weight of someone finally naming her own wounds. Felice's apology did not erase the past or the harm. It did not make what happened to Mira smaller. But it did complicate the story in a way that felt honest. Mira saw that cruelty had different victims inside the same house. Power had been passed down like a habit, and Felice was both a participant and one who had learned to survive by copying the script. Mira listened, then said quietly, "Now you know." Those words were not triumph. They were calibration, a measure of how life had taught both of them. The exchange rippled through the hall. People noticed the former antagonist humbled. Some whispered that complex truths were unfolding, that the family's public collapse forced private reckonings. The twist did something important. It stripped the narrative of easy villains and gave it a harder, truer shape. Mira walked away with no sudden closure, but with a clearer boundary. Forgiveness was not required. Understanding and the refusal to let the cycle continue felt enough. The crowd moved on. Mira held hope tighter and felt the small, fierce certainty that she would teach a different way. Mira moved to a small town a few hours away. She rented a modest apartment with bright curtains and a calendar full of appointments she chose herself. The center she had sketched on napkins turned into a one-room counseling space with donated chairs, a battered filing cabinet, and a whiteboard that listed resources. It was simple, but it was hers. She called it a counseling hub. Not a monument to pain, but a steady place people could come to get help, paperwork guidance, and a listening ear. Clients arrived in waves, women who recognized their own quiet suffering, a father trying to learn how not to repeat his father's mistakes, a neighbor who wanted to volunteer. Each small connection felt like an answer to the private SOS she had once sent. Hope grew fast, bright, and stubborn, and Mira taught her basic things first. How to say no, how to tell a trusted adult when something felt wrong, how to keep a small jar of savings for emergencies. Those lessons were ordinary and radical all at once. Mira found joy in the routine, morning feedings, paperwork in the afternoons, a community meeting on a Thursday night. Sometimes the nights returned, memories, bad dreams, a name on social media that made her pause. Then a message would arrive from a stranger. "I left because of your story." Or a client would call to say they had filed for safety. Those notes were the proof she needed on hard days. Mira no longer wanted revenge. She wanted change. The courtroom had given her safety. The work she did now helped others find theirs. Every time she spoke at a small event or handed a mother a list of legal contacts, she felt the arc of her life bending towards something practical and humane. She watched the sunrise with hope and, for the first time in years, believed that simple mornings could last. The hardest part, Mira learned, wasn't the courtroom or the headlines. It was the mornings, waking up to a small body that trusted her completely, making simple choices that mattered: how to speak, when to rest, who to let in. After the conviction and the center opening, life had a steady, ordinary beat. That steadiness felt like a kind of victory no one had promised her. People still whispered. Some neighbors pretended nothing had happened. Some friends wanted the story to be over so they could return to easy conversation. But others reached out, real and raw. A mother who left with 2 children, a man who asked how to stop repeating his father, a young woman who said Mira's account gave her courage to call the hotline. Those messages kept arriving like small lights on hard days. Mira kept teaching the things she wished someone had taught her sooner: how to name harm, how to document it, how to build a slow plan to safety. She taught practical skills: filling out forms, finding legal help, keeping records, and also the quieter lessons: how to keep a promise to yourself, how to choose safety over shame. The story did not end in a single courtroom or with a single apology. Justice changed the public account, but the real work was personal and ongoing. Mira learned to hold both truth and mercy without confusing them. She did not forget. She did not forgive on demand. She simply refused to let the house define her life or her child's future. If Mira's story moved you, do one clear thing: make noise where it matters. Subscribe to hear more real stories that push for change. Share this video so someone who needs help might see it. And in the comments, tell us, would you have stayed silent, or would you have sent an SOS like Mira did? Your answer could be the nudge someone needs today.